With Broken Truth, this is John Davidson, and today I'm joined by Christine Dolan, investigative journalist, and Major Mike Gary. Mike works for Truth for Health Foundation, and he's also a member of the current Army National Guard, I believe, part-time, but you were full-time. Major Gary, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, John.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and your history and how you got to this position or this point?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. Yeah, so at this point, I have 27 years of total service, 17 full-time years, and my full-time career is what I lost 3 years ago, or for almost 4 years ago now, back in 2021, when a fraudulent 15-6 investigation was launched on me. And it was ultimately because of the COVID mandates. And so I have a long time in. I've been around, done many different things. I started as an enlisted man, and I was picked out by the senior enlisted non-commissioned officers, NCOs, to actually look into officer school. And right after 9/11 is when I decided to jump over and search out to be an officer. And that's what I did. And so as an officer, I started off as a field artillery officer, which I absolutely loved that. And then I had to switch over to engineers because at the time I still had a civilian career and I was working in construction and building. And so that transferred over really good with an engineer officer position. Did that, commanded as an engineer officer. And then eventually I ended up working for what's called a weapons of mass destruction civil support team. And every National Guard state has one of these hazardous material response teams specifically for CBRN, that's CBRN, which stands for chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear. And at that point in my life, I had just come back from Iraq. And so I had to become a chemical officer to do that. And at that point, I was starting to learn a lot of different things about the world and our food and stuff like that. So that profession fit real good with stuff I was doing in my private life, like changing food, getting rid of bad, dangerous foods, but also raising my own food. I have a small homestead where I have animals that I raise, I eat, and, birds, flocks of birds and stuff like that to go along with it. So these two things just fit hand in glove. And so I absolutely loved my job and I got really good on it. And I have thousands of hours of studying on my own. And just so you know, John, I'm on here today representing my own First Amendment and my personal story and not representing the military in any way. So as the audience should see, I have quite a vast background in the military. I chose to get rid of my civilian career, 15 years ago. And once the COVID mandates came down, and investigation was launched against me, being middle-aged, it's been kind of hard picking back up going into the civilian world, especially up here in the Northeast. Where you more or less had to have the shot to be employed in most places, or they didn't really have a lot of sympathy for you being fired in one place and then moving into some other place. So it's been quite hard, and that's why Dr. Elizabeth Bleet from the Truth for Health Foundation is such a great person. Not only does she run a really great medical practice, but the Truth for Health Foundation has been tremendous in helping people like myself, the military in particular. There wasn't a lot of people that in 2021, 2022 had the ability or the know-how to even help us because we're kind of a closed system. When you ask lawyers for help, they're like, oh, that's a big thing. I don't want to get involved with that. I don't even know how. You're going to need a special lawyer for that. So that's things that I experienced in 2022. There wasn't a lot of help. And eventually I found that Truth for Health Foundation. And but it was too late for me. I already lost my full-time career. And then I struggled to escape persecution after the fraudulent 15-6 investigation. The Maine Army National Guard launched a security clearance investigation on me, which I'm still currently under. So this has been like almost 4 years, but over 3 now. I've been investigated. And every time I have pitched a fight. And at this point, I think I really deserve an honorary law degree because a lot of this I've had to do on my own. One little side note, considering the time and space we're at right now, and the fact that Pete Hegseth has just been approved and he's the new Secretary of Defense, the morning after, I started texting some people, and one of them was my old trial defense service JAG officers. So they, military lawyers that represent you. So his name's Chuck. And Chuck represented me for the fraudulent 15-6 investigation. And going back to that 2021 timeframe, fall of 2021, when I went under it, when Chuck and I first talked on the phone, Chuck didn't see a problem with the COVID mandate, the shot particularly. Okay. And I was like, oh man, this guy doesn't understand that it was unlawful, forcing an emergency use authorization product on the force. And so the first couple conversations, I won't say they went rough. They didn't go rough. It's just, I realized he, as a lawyer, didn't know that it was unlawful. It broke the informed consent laws. So that's where I was in late 2021. So yesterday morning, the day after Pete Hegseth's in the SecDef slot, Chuck said to me by text, "You were right about everything." And that's the first real big vindication, and now there's a string of vindication coming along. But, Chuck and I, although I convinced him it was unlawful through the course of him defending me, and he did a tremendous job defending me, especially on the First Amendment side of this, which would be the religious exemption that I filed before the shot mandate, or excuse me, before the fielding of the shot even came out. That would be December of 2020. Mine's dated 1 December 2020. I submitted it to my chain of command. So that also expresses that I knew things were coming ahead of time. But that vindication by Chuck, because Chuck had to get deep into what the chain of command was coming after me for. And what did they come after me for? Well, up above my shoulder here, you see the stars in a Roman numeral 3. What opened that investigation was a sticker on my coffee mug with the Roman numeral 3. Okay. And I have this flag purposely in the back. It stands for 3 percenters. And there's a historical tie to the revolution, and 3% stood up against the crown of England. And that 3% is what made a difference. Okay. So it's a historical thing. But of course, you have the fake false flag event, the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping case, those were supposed to be 3 percenters that did it. And of course, we go through all that. It was the feds that set that whole thing up, right? These are the things we know now. But my point is, this symbology, this patriotic symbology, is how they ended up purging thousands of us, tens of thousands of us out of the military in the 2021 through 2022 timeframe. And of course, they did such a great job at it, they broke the military. And the military is in this current condition, and we're hoping this Pete Hegseth, which I think he's a divine pick, can turn this ship around and quickly. So anyway, yeah.
Major, thank you for your service, and thank you for your courage to fight this. Did you get? I'm curious if you had any help from Susan Collins or any of your representatives.
No. That's a very good question, and how it took place up here in Maine. So you look at New York and Massachusetts, Maine mirrors them, and then Maine will even try to get ahead of them. So when the whole COVID lockdowns came down the pike, Maine, in the first year, let's say 2020 into early 2021, barely any COVID cases in the state of Maine, yet we were very tyrannical. I mean, the state police were used to spy on church congregations, for an example, early on. And then, of course, Maine ended up firing all of its good doctors and nurses, and they created a hole in the hospitals. in 2021 into 2022. They did such a great job at the mandates that they broke the hospital systems in the Main Army National Guard, in Air National Guard, actually had to fill holes for several months in those hospitals to help out, which was really bizarre.
When you
Uh,
say they broke the system, are you suggesting that a lot of people decided to quit their jobs in the hospital system?
oh, absolutely. Check. Yep, you're correct. Yeah, there was a lot of doctors and nurses fired, EMS people. Again, we just had somebody die in a very rural area because nobody would send an ambulance to go get them. So these are the lingering effects that this state still has. I mean, you can't count on an ambulance coming to save you in an emergency situation if you live in rural Maine. That's just a fact now. Okay, we just had somebody die within the last month because an ambulance couldn't get there. So that's what we're dealing with. That's how shorthanded we are. We are so shorthanded. Now, there's multiple reasons why we're shorthanded, because of the mandates forcing people out because they wouldn't take the shots, right? The dangerous shots. Then you have people injured from the shots. And then at this point, you've got people moving out of the state into, other states that are favorable and like to hire people and take care of their people that they hire. But that's not this state.
How do you
Um,
feel about Bobby Kennedy nomination at HHS?
Absolutely love it. This was like the final piece in the Trump campaign to me, because food, like I was trying to express earlier, I would say when I was around the age of 30, I started to realize there was something wrong with our food supply. And I know it now. I absolutely know it because I changed the way my family eats and we got incredibly healthy. Um, when I did that change in food, I went from like a 14-minute 2 mile to like a 12-minute 2 mile. And all my subordinates, peers alike in the military actually know this. They saw it when I got extremely healthy. And yeah, my physical statistics got so much better, even though I was already pretty good at max in the military physical training tests. I got even better. And so I was always beating the younger people. And I would express, hey, I really don't work out that much more than I used to. It's the fact that I changed my diet. So, and this is what Robert Kennedy means. He means about actually exposing these things with processed foods, which is a big deal. But okay, that's a small thing. The first thing is these mRNA injections that need exposing. Every study that's coming out now, it needs to get the proper attention at how dangerous these shots are, because there is lingering effects. I believe when he actually gets into the HHS and he starts pulling into data like excess mortality, for example, I actually know that it's increased around 20% in the last couple of years in the state of Maine. But they won't admit to this. So I am looking forward to him actually pulling down and pulling out these statistics about excess mortality or injuries. I think we are so shorthanded, in our companies and businesses, because there's a lot of people that are suffering from these injuries. There was 9 or 11 pages of injuries. What was over 1,000 different types of injuries that Pfizer had to admit to in that document that the judge forced him to bring out. I forget. I used to know the exact number. It was almost like 2,000 different types of injuries, but I think we're missing people because they can't work anymore, the disabled. And I think that's what RFK is going to do. He's going to bring all this information out and shine the light on it like it needs to be. And people are going to understand, oh, this is why so-and-so had a heart attack. Oh, this is the stroke. This is the clot. I mean, because anecdotally, you hear it all the time. Just like at drill weekend, I'm not representing the military, but I'm just saying what I observed. These are my honest observations. There was a pretty senior female non-commissioned officer that I know at least had 3 of the shots and sick with COVID and couldn't speak for 2 weeks. So laryngitis so bad, couldn't speak for 2 weeks. and suffering from it, and then you hear a bunch of emergency room visits where people are very sick. I mean, I have never seen the military this sick as after the COVID shots. And it's been 2 or 3 years the military has been extremely sick, especially in the winter time. You're missing people all the time because they're sick with COVID. A lot of the times they'll admit to COVID. So the shots, even if you ignore what I'm saying, all the severe injuries, people are sick with COVID all the time. This should cause question. This is what Robert Kennedy is going to do. And this is why Susan Collins needs to get on board and shine the light on this. But yeah, go ahead.
August 2021, when Janet Woodcock, who was acting head of the FDA, pushed out the approval for the Pfizer vaccines, nobody paid attention, even Fox News, to the fine print of the FDA's press release, which said that there is a risk of myocarditis. The full risk is unknown. It is highest amongst males between the age of 12 and 17, which, by the way, is our next generation of war fighters. If you wanted to get rid of our ability to fight tomorrow's war, you give them an enlarged heart. Those boys can't fight. And that I learned about that after Ernesto Ramirez's son, Junior, died. So, it's good that you and others avoided it. How many others would you say in your group resisted?
Well, I can tell you this for a fact. And it's a whole timing thing, how 2021 unfolded. And the pressure in the military was immense. And a lot of service members have tried to get their stories out. But I think once Pete Hegseth reinstates, or however this starts to happen, you're going to hear the stories. They're going to be like very tragic, like the J6 stuff. Not as bad, but it's going to be pretty bad as this pressure went on. In the Army, and I'm going to speak from the main Army National Guard's perspective because I can speak accurately from that, is the Army has had a lot of experiments on them. So there was a lot of resistance. I would say entering the summer of 2021, only about 50% of the Army National Guard in Maine had received the shot at that point. But why? Well, the reason is because we've experienced things like the anthrax shot, which was emergency use authorization. It hurt a lot of people. And there was a lawsuit that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court sided with the statutes that we have on the books that you can't force an emergency use authorization product. It has to be informed consent and all these things, right? Well, this is essentially a repeat, okay? Because the FDA approved product, which actually I want to give Doc Vliet the credit here. Her legal grant paid to support a Navy Lieutenant Bill Mosley, who took it all the way to an administrative separation board. He said he wasn't going to get the shot. And in that board, they discovered there was no FDA-approved product. There was only Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, not Comirnaty or Spikevax. So what did the Navy do after they had this administrative separation board? Did they do the right thing and communicate this across the branches of services? No, they just closed up about it and never said anything. But Doc Vliet and the Truth for Health Foundation paid for that legal grant that supported Bill Mosley that uncovered that. So it's going to be difficult if we go back, because I gave my chain of command no excuse. They know the law. I quoted it. I delivered them hundreds of pages of what I call legal evidence, and then other evidence, whether it was scientific or anecdotal information. And, I know I'm going to speak very personally here, because they have no way out of this. And this is why this is going to be incredibly awkward. I know that the chief of staff for the Maine Army National Guard, they had allowed family members of full-timers, AGRs, active guard reservists, which I was. That was my full-time job. They allowed our family members to go in and get shots from the Army National Guard. And one of my friends, a good friend now, His wife went in and got the shot. So this would be a military person putting a shot in her arm. And this was April 2021. Well, the wife came down with severe myocarditis, so bad that it didn't look like she was going to survive. So anyway, my friend, I'm going to call him Happy. That's his nickname. We called him Happy. He told the head guy, the chief of staff for the Maine Army National Guard, to his face that his wife had received severe myocarditis and there's no way he could in hell that he could get the shot. And they had 5 children. He couldn't take the risk. His wife, he's not sure she was going to live at that time. And so I know the head guy knows, and then I was put under investigation right around that time. And that's where I was also able to actually quote the law to that same guy, the chief of staff of the Maine Army National Guard, and tell him that you didn't have actual FDA approved product. So there's no excuse. There's no way out of that. That's all written in paper. That's all in this fraudulent 15-6 investigation that was brought upon me. And this was what my lawyer, Chuck, was saying in that text. You were right about everything. And so this is the vindication stage, but I'm not sure. It's going to be incredibly awkward where some of these colonels, 06 full bird colonels and above, especially the general ranks, really broke the law. I mean, it was an unlawful order, so I'm not sure how this is all going to work out. I'll tell you, there's other soldiers that were harmed financially or career-wise as bad as me. They're not going to go back in unless there's accountability. So this is going to be very interesting and awkward, very awkward. I sent a letter to Pete Hegseth because I've read his book. I've studied up on him. I had to because he's going to be our leader, right? So that's what a good leaders do. We study things. And I asked him, I said, Pete, I've missed my promotion to Lieutenant Colonel 3 years ago. Would you promote me at Camp Chamberlain, Augusta, Maine? To make it more awkward, I can only imagine if the Secretary of Defense actually takes me up on that offer, which he's very fond of General Joshua Chamberlain. So that's why I felt I had a little edge on him to ask him to do that. That would be something funny to promote me in front of the people that persecuted me for 3 years.
Well, this actually is a brilliant idea. We should not just, reinstate, but we should make those who resisted leaders because those are the ones who could identify a potential threat earliest. If that's not what the military is for, I don't know what it is. So what a good idea.
Yeah, it is a good idea. At the same time, Major, I'm interested to know, what was it like when you resisted and you were still participating in the Army? How did those people deal with you when you were telling them the truth and pointing out that they were not following the laws?
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question. I'm one of the early ones that went down. So, and I'll just give the timeline so people can understand it. I went down early, and being a major and a senior major at that, I was almost a lieutenant colonel in 2021. So Lloyd Austin actually gave a lawful order mandating the military to get an FDA approved product at the end of August. I believe it was like August 23rd or 4th of 2021. Okay. So my religious exemption had been in for nearly 10 months. Roll into September. End of September 2021, my religious exemption had been in for 10 months. And then they told me this would be the Army Surgeon General's office rejected my religious exemption packet. I think it was the 27th of September of 2021. Okay, less than 30 days, almost closer to 20 days, I was put under a fraudulent 15-6 investigation. So my chain of command, who was all supportive of my First Amendment right to have my religious exemption packet. They were very supportive back in December 2020, early January 2021. They were all supportive. See, they had no clue what was about to transpire. I did. I knew where this was going. So they knew they couldn't come after me until they got that first rejection on my packet. So less than 30 days, I was under this fraudulent 15-6 investigation. And it was about that symbol on my coffee mug, which was the size of, about half the size of my thumb. And I removed it. I wasn't, I gave my commander a little bit of a dirty look, but I removed it right in front of him or covered it up. And because I said, okay, I can't, I'm being censored now, huh? I asked that question. And of course, that was being obstinate or misconduct, talking back, whatever. They use those little things against me. And then they proceeded to anything that was perceived as MAGA. Okay. Make America great again. Trump, anything connected to Trump became free game. So any private conversations that I had with soldiers to give understanding, I never stood up in front of soldiers to tell them to do this politically or that politically. Okay. And I've been a commander. I've been in front of a lot of troops. I never was like that. However, in small groups, yes, I would entertain political conversations, hardly ever started them, but I would entertain them if I was allowed to speak in them. And so any little thing like that was free game. Another thing, so how was it known that I was a supporter of President Trump? Well, President Trump landed on my high school soccer field because this is up in Guilford, Maine. This is a really funny, close story. But President Trump flew up to Guilford, Maine because Puritan Products was the only place in America that was making the PCR stick. Okay. And remember, there was a big rush to get away from China. And that was, I thought President Trump at the time knew we needed to get away from China's medical supplies. And so anyway, the place was where I grew up, Guilford, Maine, Puritan Products. He landed on my soccer field. And what I did that day to be proper, and again, to be proper, just like most of the soldiers agreed to in every witness statement, I took a day of leave so I could actually be in my hometown area, not political. I'm, private citizen Mike Gary, not Major Gary. And my commander allowed me to take that day off, even though our unit was the unit that was sniffing the air. We had the air monitoring devices checking the air. So we were detailed by this Secret Service, but I got allowed to take the day off for when he came up to Guilford, Maine. So of course, everybody knew that I loved President Trump. It wasn't a secret, but that's how. Yeah.
So let me ask you, so was there blowback because of that?
Oh yeah. This is what they use these things in my, this hearsay stuff, to come after me. For example, one of the allegations.
Was it just because you were resisting the vaccination and they decided that they were going to throw the kitchen sink just to see what was going to stick?
Yeah, well, you had two things going on. This is a great question. And you had inside the military, when Lloyd Austin came in, he set up this domestic extremist board. I forget the name of it. And he hired special people. Essentially what it was to purge patriots. That was started immediately in the winter of 2021. Well, what happened is you had the shot being fielded about the same time, okay? And then you go into the summer of 2021, they fired that Space Force Lieutenant Colonel. He was a Lomar, I believe is his name. He's just appointed as an undersecretary now, but they fired him because he wrote a book about Marxism, which is the DEI stuff in the, trying to purge domestic extremists out of the military. That's all that stuff. They fired that guy in, I think it was like June or July. And then you had the failed Afghanistan pullout.
That was August 2021.
Correct. So what you had is this DEI stuff and this wanting to purge what they're called domestic extremists. And then you had the shot pressure. Well, what happened was after Afghanistan failure, all the channeled anger within the Lloyd Austin office got funneled or focused right on the unvaccinated. And we bore the full brute force of their anger. So, because, okay, why? So, for example, when I was
that was around the same time, Major, when the mandates, the people tried to financially incentivize people to get the shots in the spring of 2021.
Yeah, exactly.
Then the breakthrough, these are people who took the shot and all of a sudden they're getting COVID. That was at the end of July, sometime in August.
Mhm.
And then around the end of August, beginning of September 2021 is when you had the corporate mandates like at United Airlines and other corporations. And you also had, I forget the exact date, but President Biden had said that the federal government employees underneath the executive branch were going to be required to get their shots. So there was a shift, but I think it had not so much to do with Afghanistan. Possibly that added to the anger inside
Oh, it
with the
did.
troops.
It absolutely did. Yeah.
But at the same time, there was a shift to mandate a lot of these shots because we had the breakthrough cases at that point in time.
Yeah, and so the proof in the pudding is this. In when we started to receive our negative counselings,
Mhm.
on the as the shot pressure was building through that time frame you were just talking about, one of the questions was, uh, "Are you a Trump supporter? Are you a MAGA?" So in these counselings, and you'll hear this time and time again from a lot of us, especially us senior guys, this became crazy talk. And in one of my conversations, I said, "No, don't link me with." I was quite angry with President Trump at that time. I said, "Don't link me with President Trump. He's the father of the vaccine, and I'm not for the vaccine. This is strictly science for me, or religious, pending because I can do both sides, right? I have a science background for the military, so I can argue either or. My two sides of this are in harmony, whether it's religious or scientific. They're in harmony." And I can argue any one. See, I was the senior guy that had things done, or the example for the religious exemption packet done many, many months, almost 10 months before anybody else even thought to start one. So yes, younger soldiers or subordinates came to me for my example, and I gladly shared it. And that's not a problem. That is not wrong in any way, but that did become wrong. That became conspiracy theory. And in these private negative counseling sessions that we received, that's where they would start. Are you watching? What news are you watching? Or were you spreading conspiracy theories?
It
Well,
sounds so crazy in America that people would actually say, "What news do you watch?"
We all experience this.
It's nobody's business. It's nobody's business. You get to do whatever you want in a free democracy.
Before we get too far, I want to have like two little anecdotes for you, Mike. One was back in like 2018, 2019, I was working with a network I can't specify, but the network had a show that I was doing promos for. And the show featured, let's just say, people who, for whatever reasons, weren't wearing clothes, and they were placed out in areas where they were bombarded with skeeters and sand spurs. Let's just put it like that. And I got this weird note, and this is the first time I heard about 3%ers, but they asked me to look for any example of the three icon as a tattoo on one of the contestants of the show. And they
Oh,
made
wow.
me either remove the character completely or blur him out. And I think they even got rid of this character later on once they realized who he was. So this network, by the way, which apparently has political affiliations with Pelosi and Schumer, if you look at their CEO, I'm not saying the name of the network, so I'm not violating a contract, but there was, even in the late teens of the 2019, 2018, there was an effort to remove any reference to that from popular vernacular. And the
That's
second thing,
interesting.
I want to revisit that because I've wondered when that's always bugged me, that little weird thing, because I never heard of it. I didn't know what it was. And I looked it up and I was like, why do they care?
Because
They were,
it only takes 3% to
yeah,
change
yeah.
they were very
public
concerned.
opinion.
They were very concerned. And this was during Trump's administration. So that was one thing. And then the second thing was, over the past couple of days, I spoke offline with J6 guy, and his house, he didn't go in the Capitol, but he got at the door. And his home was raided with SWAT. He had a 1-year-old in the house. They FBI swatted him. And it's one of the things that he said when he was handcuffed and they were going through his belongings, ransacking his house. one of the FBI agents said to the other FBI agent, "Oh, we found some Trump paraphernalia in the closet," which is funny, but it's really screwed up.
Well, I can actually explain this really good. You're actually talking to the good guy about this. Okay, so my field is response, right? And so, for example, my unit actually in 2018 responded to Susan Collins' home due to what was perceived to be a ricin letter, which it was not. It was found to be inert, not ricin, some other type of fake starch, cornstarch, or something like that. But anyway, I'm used to working with FBI and other type of responders or other type of law enforcement. Okay, so I've been in these circles for almost 16 years, at least 15, dealing with all these different government agencies. So being aware of what they perceive as threats is a big deal. So like 15 years ago, what was the concern back then, instead of the 3%ers and other groups or Proud Boys and Punisher symbols and stuff like that, was sovereign citizens. This all started out as sovereign citizens were a big problem. Like,
What is a sovereign citizen?
well,
What does
a
that mean?
sovereign citizen, this is a good question, is somebody who believes in the Constitution very, very deeply, and will even to from the government stance of this, these sovereign citizens will go on and say that I have these rights to do just about anything. I don't have to go through the state, for example, to get certain certifications or licenses. Okay, so there's very strict interpretation of the Constitution. Okay, and I'm not going to quote one way or another which way I stand on that, but I will tell you they were at the top of the concern list in the intelligence side of things over Middle Eastern terrorists, like what we would traditionally think as, let's go tip back 10, 15 years, what we would think as the number one threat, like a Middle Eastern terrorist of that time. No, sovereign citizens were their biggest concern. Well, over the course of time, through the Tea Party movement, which eventually turned into the MAGA movement and stuff, other symbols like this one, or patriotic symbols, even like the Betsy Ross flag. Again, this is the Betsy Ross flag with Roman numeral 3. When they brought fraudulent investigation on me in the state Main Army National Guard for domestic extremists, they also opened up a handful of other domestic extremist investigations, and they were based off, one guy had the Betsy Ross flag, which is historical, right?
But the interesting thing about this, Major, when you're talking about this, because the reason why we did this interview today was, in terms of Bobby Kennedy's nomination that's coming up and everything like that. Do you take a look at all of this stuff being connected, the things that were happening being connected to COVID?
Well,
or was it more political at the time? Looking back now.
Yes, I do. However, I can see where other people wouldn't. Now, when you get this COVID opportunity time, right? This is where you can really explode things, like going from sovereign citizens being a concern to actually all these other symbols. For example, Punisher symbol, Second Amendment. I mean, Second Amendment symbols are things, John, that they were probably looking for, as well as the anything that's related to MAGA. And my flag has got the Second Amendment writing on it. So these things, once you got into mandating and actually breaking the Constitution with these COVID mandates, anything was free game from then on. And this is where, so from my position, let me step back into my profession, CBRN. Okay. And out of the CBRN, chem, bio, rad, nuclear, B has always been my biggest concern. Okay. The biological warfare agents, because there's always a psychological piece to it. Okay. A chemical, we have great chemical detectors that I pick up a chemical like nothing, a nerve agent, a blister agent. I can sense it with my meters and detectors very quickly. Okay. Same with radiological material or nuclear material. My handheld devices that I had in my unit would pick them up instantly. But the one you can't do that with is biological agents. So there's always a psychological piece to it. For now, my skill set, which my chain of command will absolutely validate this, even though they don't like me, is that I had a knack for setting up extremely complex and great training lanes when it came to these types of threats. And I always love setting up a biological training lane because you can deploy the agent and walk away. And I can walk away for days.
So what is your point here? What is your
My
point here?
point here is that there's a psychological component, and I can walk away as a bad guy, and then I can stir up, all these false narratives around it. And that's what COVID was, you know?
Do you think that COVID was a biological weapon?
It's both. It's both. And that's the great thing about it. That's why, from my expertise, that's my concern about it when it transpired. It's already happened. It's too late. We kind of failed, right? We didn't follow our natural policies and protocols that we had to actually counteract it properly. Okay, we did not do that. So the thing is, even if you have a real agent, there's going to be a psychological piece to the biological agent. And that's what we absolutely experience. Now, did the psychological piece get exploited, magnified 100,000 times? Absolutely. So there's both there. But I'm just telling you from an expert's opinion, if I was a bad guy, I would deploy a biological agent just like what was. Okay. And we failed as a country in it.
Mike, let me ask you, were you ever trained in Coxiella burnetii?
No.
It's a known biological weapon. It had all the same symptoms as what we were told was COVID early on. You treat it with doxycycline, hydroxychloroquine. Didier Raoult, the guy who came up with the treatment for COVID, he was an expert at Coxiella. And the CDC even tells you how to spray it over a city to result in X number of deaths, chronic conditions, whatever else. So if you wanted to create unexplainable illnesses, pneumonia illnesses, especially in a certain area, it's aerosolized weapon.
Yeah.
But I haven't been able to get anyone to test for it, strangely enough.
Well, yeah, and that's the difficulty about biological agents. You have to have very specific testing methods. And then if you do that example you were talking about, if you spray it over a city or a vast area, your samples are going to become corrupted, and then they're going to become environmental samples. And, what I've learned through my years of biological agents is they're not very effective like that. That's why something like the anthrax letters was a very scary case, because that anthrax had been gained the function to be a spore former and which is a protective shell, and make it through things like sunlight, corrosive materials, acidic materials, and alkaline materials that usually destroy biological weapons. So that's, in a way, biological weapons don't have a great success rate because you have all these factors. Those factors I was talking about work against them. That's why. But on the other side, it's a great psychological thing because you can convince people not to go near each other. You can convince people to treat each other like diseases, which is what we experienced in COVID to the nth degree. And,
looking around the corner, would you say, assuming we get through this, assuming that we make leaders out of those who were aware of the shenanigans earlier than most, would you say that despite the horrors that we've all endured, that our country and our military may be wiser and less susceptible to this sort of attack in the future?
Look, we had all the proper procedures set. I mean, I've interviewed Colonel Jim Zitlow, retired.
He's a good friend.
Okay. Friend. You guys know who he is.
I know who he is. Yeah.
He was the officer in charge of creating the first pandemic plan for our country, which was in 2000.
Let me explain to the audience. And Colonel Jim Zitlow is retired now, but he was appointed by Secretary Gates in 2007 to create one of the 12 global plans that President Bush wanted at the time. And that was the 2007 plan that was implemented in 2009. At that point in time, it was a pandemic plan for the military, and it had early treatments. It had no quarantine except for those that were sick. There were no mandated masks and no mandated vaccinations. It was implemented in 2009 during the H1N1 avian flu. And then somewhere between 2009 and 2020, that plan was blown out and replaced by everything that we all experienced in 2020 and 2021.
Yeah,
He's going to be on. He's going to be on this show later on next week. He is actually flying right now.
Okay, so which was a great plan. The first step is, therapeutics and antivirals, which we have a strategic national stockpile. I know where the one is for the state of Maine. We had all those things in it. Mm-hmm. So we just need to follow what we had on the books as proper procedures. And if we would have,
or to be explained why they didn't follow the books, and that's part of the unraveling and getting back on track, is who made the decision not to follow the plan that was implemented when there wasn't a lot of upheaval.
And so this brings us back to why we're talking about this. This is what RFK is going to do. This is the important thing. He's going to reveal these things, and then we're going to find out we had all the proper procedures, we had all the proper units or agencies or whatever to deal with this properly. We didn't. And it comes right down to the origin. This is really where the center of my fight is. If we go back to these lab systems or the Wuhan lab where we knew something was going on in China, we can fight and argue about.
Well, the CIA has now come out and said that it's a lab leak.
It's a lab leak, and it's gain of function. And so that means making offensive biological weapons. So this is where we need to go back to, is the origin. So if we would have treated it like a biological weapon, okay, and not a novel thing from nature, totally different response. My unit would have been deployed as hazmat responders to a biological weapon, not helping do clinical PCR swabs like they did for the testing sites the first couple months. See, we didn't do it correctly because we never tried to get to the center of where it originated from.
Well, they didn't want to do that at the time, Major, because if they had focused on the lab leak at the time, the billions of dollars that have been assigned by the USAID and even governments from Norway, it's not just China and the US, all of that, the world leaders would have to acknowledge the fact that gain of function research is as dangerous as Frankenstein science, and they would have had to shut that down. Now, when they argued that it was going to be the wet labs, the interesting thing is that they didn't respond according to if they really believed it was the wet markets that had caused it. Because if that had been the case, then they would have shut down every wet market across the world. And we even have them here in the United States. So they didn't do whatever they should have done based upon the lies that they wanted to cover up or the lies that they wanted to, implement into people's minds. Okay.
Yeah.
They didn't tell the truth.
And that's just where I think we have to, RFK gets in there. He starts bringing this stuff out. Whoa, hire me. I want to investigate a specific piece of that. I want to do that. Why didn't we follow our steps? Why didn't we follow our procedures? That's what makes the military so great. We're procedural and we follow them. We train to follow those procedures all the time. And that's why, maybe RFK can actually make the military part of a great solution here in the future. That's why I'm hanging in here. That's why I've made it through this very tough time of persecution. I'm looking forward to a moment to actually hopefully fixing things like that.
Mike, and I made a movie about hydroxychloroquine, the media response around it called Epidemic of Fraud. One of the things I cover in it, because you just mentioned the strategic national stockpile, which is really hard to say. One of the things that we discovered was that hydroxychloroquine was not in the strategic national stockpile, according to the testimony of Rick Bright, who was head of BARDA, a biological research agency within the government under ASPR. I'm curious. Do you consider, and obviously you can't specifically say what is or isn't in it. I would want you to, but if that were the case, that when Rick Bright testified to the Congress that he tried to get sources of it, he tried to beg for sources of hydroxychloroquine before he turned around and discredited it with the head of the FDA, Janet Woodcock. Wouldn't that be a huge error, considering that this is a medication that we use to treat malaria?
Well, yeah. Well, I guess I don't believe that. First of all, I got to believe it's in the stockpile. I don't know that. And to the audience, I don't know one way or another. Okay. I don't handle the stockpile that intimately to actually know. But that's the first thing I would check out. I would validate what he's telling us or invalidate it.
Well, we had to get 60 million doses. That was something Peter Navarro did. He got 63 million doses from India and Pakistan. And we did not have it. According to Rick Bright's testimony to Congress, we did not have it.
Well, there was a lot of it that was collected off the streets and in the pharmacies and in the hospitals at the time, too, because even in Bobby's book, he talked about the fact that they collected it and they kept it from the market, even just as they did for ivermectin.
So I can tell you this. There must be on some type of tracker that they have in the Strategic National Stockpile or on the logistics side. I got to believe that hydroxychloroquine is meant to be there, and it was meant to be inventoried so often. I know with the unit that I work for, we have specific meds in case we actually have to run into a chemical or biological threat and use those, right? And those things had to be inventoried monthly in our unit. Okay.
Well, there was some conversation at the time about the stockpiles not being replenished. And there was some criticism of the Obama administration and I can't remember the exact, I don't know whether it was hydroxy or ivermectin or whatever it was, but there was a conversation of who they were going to lay the blame on. Was it Trump or was it Obama's administration that didn't replenish the stockpiles? So again, there's a lot of cross-referencing of shame and naming without the facts.
Yeah, I'll tell you how I'd solve that. There's somebody that actually has to count it. So that's a possible person. And then there's a supervisor or manager above that person that probably said, no, we're just going to let it go. We're not, that's okay. We don't have our inventory. I'm going to sign off on it. Possibly that person. Now, I don't know how many links are in the chain, but whoever the person was that signed off on, hey, we're not replenishing hydroxychloroquine, which seems like hydroxychloroquine is needed for a lot of different ailments, right? It's a big deal. That is a big deal, okay? That person, whoever that person is, in that link that I just laid out, that's probably done monthly. It's probably built off the military way of doing things. That person needs to be held accountable. And if that means being fired and losing pensions and stuff like that, that's why I'm looking forward to RFK. I really want him to bring that type of accountability to the system, because to go back to the military in like
he may not have that power. It may not be in his envelope. Remember that. Bobby can only do so much under HHS. He's not the Secretary of Defense.
No, but he can hire good people under him that will do those things, and that's my point.
He may not, because it might be Secretary Hegseth's purview at that point in time. So let's not think that Bobby's going to be able to do everything, because he's not president. Okay, his nomination is for the Secretary of HHS. What would you say to Susan Collins, having gone through this, Mike? Because we got to close out here.
Oh yeah, well, Susan Collins, we allowed the mandates to really destroy the state of Maine. A lot of small businesses went out. A lot of small businesses got fined. A lot of distrust in the state. We're losing people to other states. They're leaving. It's very difficult to even start a business here. And not to mention that we have, these mandates that could come back anytime. They keep threatening these new pandemics from time to time on the news. And we know how the state's going to handle it. They're going to go very tyrannical. And, we've broke the emergency medical services in this state. We've nearly broke the hospitals. And how many more things are we going to break trying to follow these rules that shouldn't be rules? They go against actual laws. So I think if Senator Collins, you need to look into some of these things and what the damage that they did. We need to actually get to the center of the information and how this state is really doing to find the real health of this state. And I'm not just talking physical health of people, but businesses, infrastructure, and all the different entities that make the state up. It is not a healthy state right now. I mean, the only reason why I stay here is I nearly have my mortgage paid for and my piece of land. Other than that, I would have left the state as soon as I was fired. Because my chain of command decided to go just as tyrannical and get rid of good people. I mean, how many hundreds of thousands of dollars have been spent on me to be trained to the level I am? And then I'm not the only one. There was 30 other GOMARs, General Officer Memorandums of Reprimands, that ended up being the final number is about 30 in the state of Maine for the Army National Guard that got reprimands like me. And this totally destroys you. Not to mention in the active component, some of those soldiers got general discharges. They were actually talking about dishonorable discharges for us for a time. And a general discharge, it's very hard to get a job after that. That's not a good status. And they were talking about dishonorable, which almost makes it impossible to enter the world again. Who would want to risk going back or going into the military only to get destroyed because you won't take a poison shot? And so these things need to be remedied. Senator Collins, you need to look into these things. What I've observed the last 4 years, you have just given every pharmaceutical industry company a pass. And that's not right. We need to look into these things like remdesivir. That I just heard another story about somebody getting remdesivired and almost dying just a few days ago. So why can't we end these dangerous protocols? We need to look into this, Senator. Please.
Mike,
thank you.
Yes, this has been really, really informative. I hope and pray that you get a heck of a promotion and lead the people that turned on you. And by the way, I hope you also kept all their names because we should know who within our government is willing to sell us out and throw away the Constitution at the drop of a hat.
Yeah, I have it all. It's all
Excellent.
documented in these fraudulent investigations and FOIA requests.
Good. Well, this has been BrokenTruth.tv or Broken Truth TV. Thank you so much, Mike and Christine. We will see you guys later. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, John. Thank you, Major.